Ever since the Supreme Court handed down Bruen, anti-gun states have been trying to see how much they can get away with. California under Gavin Newsom is the prime example. In this video, I'm going to show you how Sacramento just tried to rebuild a wall around gun ownership with new fees, training mandates, parts restrictions, and a targeted strike on Glock-style pistols, and how the courts and the Constitution are punching holes straight through it. We'll look at the bills that died, the ones that survived, and the lawsuits. Nguyen v. Bonta, Rhode v. Bonta, Miller v. Bonta, Boland v. Bonta, Jaymes v. Bonta, that are already turning those victories into legal liabilities. By the end, you'll see why this fight isn't just about California law. It's about whether Bruen will have teeth or just be treated as a suggestion. Let's start with the part almost nobody covered in the headlines, the bills that never made it into law. California lawmakers came into this session with a familiar playbook. If they cannot outright ban something, they try to make it more expensive, more complicated, and more subjective until ordinary people just give up. A big chunk of that strategy failed this time, and that matters just as much as the bills that passed. One of the clearest examples is AB 1006. On paper, it looked like a cleanup to the concealed carry permit process after New York State Rifle and Pistol Association vs. Bruen. In reality, it was a way to sneak the old good moral character games back in through the side door, letting local officials dig 10 years into your past and nitpick minor inconsistencies on your application. If you have ever dealt with a hostile sheriff's office, you know how that would have been abused. The good news is that bill died. It never made it to the finish line. And for a lot of applicants. That is the difference between a predictable shall-issue process and a quiet, backroom veto of your rights. Then you have AB 1187. California already makes first-time buyers jump through the firearm safety certificate, basically a written test and a small fee. AB 1187 would have turned that into a much heavier lift by pushing toward live fire. More hours and more cost. Politicians love to call that reasonable training. In practice, it means the single mom working 2 jobs, or the retiree on a fixed income, would have to choose between groceries and the class fee just to exercise a constitutional right. That bill also failed. It did not become law, but that quiet win absolutely shows up in the real world. A different kind of proposal was SB 320, the so-called do not sell list. The sales pitch was simple. If you are in crisis, you should be able to voluntarily put yourself on a list that blocks future gun purchases. At first glance, a lot of people hear that and think, okay, that sounds harmless. The problem is what happens next. How do you get off that list later? Who has access to it? And can it be used against you in other contexts, like employment or child custody? Once the state builds this kind of database, history tells us it rarely stays as narrow and voluntary as advertised. SB 320 did not cross the finish line either. And that means California gun owners are not waking up tomorrow with a brand new, poorly defined registry of people who once said they were a risk. Add to that SB 248, which would have used taxpayer money to send one-sided warning messages about the supposed dangers of firearm ownership. Imagine the state using your own tax dollars to send propaganda to you, your neighbors, or your family members, telling them that the right you exercise is inherently dangerous and suspect. SB 248 went nowhere. It did not become law. So before we even touch the bills that passed, you can see the pattern. California tried to tighten the screws on concealed carry, jack up the cost of entry for new gun owners, create a sensitive data list of people who might be too risky to buy guns, and launch a government-funded anti-gun messaging campaign. All of those pieces fell apart. They died in committee or stalled out. That's what happens when gun owners, civil rights groups, and even some cooler heads in the legislature start asking hard questions about due process, privacy, and basic fairness. Now, let's turn to the bills that did make it across Governor Gavin Newsom's desk and got his signature. This is where you see his priorities clearly. In the same window where he vetoed over 100 other bills on topics like housing, AI regulation, and pieces of a reparations agenda, he chose to spend his political capital on new gun control. When he has to choose between appeasing progressive groups on a wide spectrum of issues and locking in more restrictions on gun owners, he is willing to sacrifice those other causes and keep the gun agenda moving. The first and loudest example is AB 1127, the so-called Glock law. Rather than being honest and saying, we are banning one of the most popular families of handguns in America, The legislature wrapped it in technical language about semi-automatic pistols that can be readily converted to fully automatic. What they are really targeting are designs like Glock and similar striker-fired pistols that use a cruciform trigger bar. They are using the fact that criminals illegally attach autosears as an excuse to cut off lawful sales of standard handguns that millions of people rely on for self-defense. In response, a coalition of pro-gun groups filed Jaymes v. Bonta, going straight at AB 1127 under the rule the Supreme Court laid down in District of Columbia v. Heller. You cannot ban arms that are in common use for lawful purposes. The whole point of that case is to test whether a state can say, "We are not banning handguns in general. We are just banning this specific family of common handguns because of how we think bad guys might misuse them." If the courts allow that trick, every popular platform is at risk. Next up is SB 704, which goes after barrels by folding them into the definition of firearm precursor parts. On its face, that sounds bureaucratic. In practice, it means that replacing a worn barrel, buying a spare, or changing calibers will now look a lot more like buying a complete firearm. You will have to go through an FFL, run the same background check, and have that transaction logged in state systems. There is no historical tradition of treating simple wear and tear parts as if they were serialized receivers. Under the Bruen framework, the state will have to explain why ordinary maintenance suddenly requires full government tracking. Then you have AB 1263, which steps into First Amendment territory. This bill targets people who intentionally or knowingly help others manufacture prohibited firearms by sharing code, CAD files, or technical instructions online. We have already seen earlier fights over whether code is speech in the defense distributed cases. AB 1263 is California taking another swing at that question, this time in the context of so-called ghost guns. Once the state claims the power to criminalize technical information because someone might misuse it, you are not just talking about gun rights anymore. You are talking about whether the government can punish people for publishing knowledge. Finally, AB 1078 tries to bring back a version of the one-gun-a-month rule that has already been struck down in Nguyen v. Bonta. Rather than accepting that decision and adjusting course, lawmakers rewrote and repackaged the same basic idea, rationing how many firearms a law-abiding adult can buy over a fixed period. It is a kind of massive resistance to the courts. The message is, if you knock down one statute, we will just pass another one that does almost the same thing and force you to sue us all over again. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, if the legislature is this aggressive and the governor is signing these bills, where is the good news? The answer lies in the courts and in the change Bruen forced in how judges are supposed to review gun laws. Take Rhode v. East Bonta, which goes after California's ammunition background check system. That regime treats every ammo purchase like a mini gun transfer, with constant checking, fees, and database errors that block lawful buyers. A federal district court already called that system unconstitutional and issued an injunction before higher courts stepped in. And the fight continued. Under the text and history test, the state has to show a real historical tradition of micromanaging ammo purchases. That is very hard to do. In Nguyen v. Bonta, the Ninth Circuit has already said that California's one-gun-a-month law does not pass muster. There is no deep historical tradition of rationing gun purchases for law-abiding citizens, and simply declaring it common sense is not enough. That precedent hangs over AB 1078 like a storm cloud. The legislature can pass the bill, but everyone knows it is standing on very shaky ground the second it hits a courtroom. Then there is Jaymes v. Bonta, the test case for AB 1127 and the Glock ban concept. This case is going to answer a crucial question: can a state pick a single, extremely common family of handguns and say, those are banned because they are too easy to convert, even when the vast majority of owners never do anything illegal with them? If the answer is no, that is not just a win for California gun owners, it is a national precedent that protects common platforms from being carved out one by one. On top of that, you have cases like Miller v. Bonta, which targets California's so-called assault weapon ban, and Boland v. Bonta, which attacks the handgun roster and the extra California-only safety features that manufacturers have to add if they want to sell new models. Together with Rhode v. Bonta, Nguyen v. Bonta, and Jaymes v. Bonta, these cases form a kind of judicial firewall. They are forcing California to defend, piece by piece, a gun law architecture that grew for decades under a much looser legal standard. When you zoom out, the pattern becomes clear. On one side, you have a legislature and a governor still trying to push the envelope: more costs, more tracking, more bans on what they call problematic guns and information. On the other side, you have a Supreme Court standard that says the Second Amendment actually means something, and a series of federal cases chipping away at laws that used to be untouchable. This session in California is a snapshot of that tug of war. Several of the worst new ideas died before they could hurt anyone. Some of the laws that did pass are already on legal life support, and every time the state overreaches, it hands 2A groups another opportunity to walk into court and ask a simple question: where in American history did governments do anything like this to ordinary law-abiding citizens who wanted to keep and bear arms? The longer that question gets asked, and the more often courts demand a serious answer, the harder it becomes for states like California to keep treating your rights as a moving target. If you take nothing else from this video, remember this: California is not unbeatable. Bad bills died. Other laws that Gavin Newsom celebrated are already being dragged into court, and the Constitution is not on their side. Our job now is to stay informed, support the cases pushing back, and make sure lawmakers know we are watching every move. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share it with one friend behind enemy lines in a blue state. I'll be here to walk you through the next round. Stay loud, lawful, and relentless.